Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this important legislative briefing on infrastructure and housing. I'm Anthony Granado. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations at Catholic Charities USA. Today we'll be hearing from some great speakers from the Catholic Charities Network who will share with us about their great work to address homelessness and affordable housing. Catholic Charities USA is a national membership organization representing more than 167 diocesan Catholic Charities member agencies, which operate 3,500 service locations across the country and in the U.S. territories. Catholic Charities operates and functions as the social service arm of the Roman Catholic Church in the United States, carrying out the gospel command to care for the most vulnerable and needy amongst us. This past year, the Catholic Charities Network provided help and created hope for close to 15 million people. The people coming to charities agencies are homeless, in search of shelter, in need of rental assistance, and are looking for an affordable place to live. Addressing homelessness and affordable housing remains a signature priority for Catholic Charities USA and the Catholic Charities Network. The Catholic tradition holds that housing and access to housing is a fundamental human right, and that speaks to the life and dignity of the human person. We know that even prior to the pandemic, homelessness and affordable housing was a major issue for millions of low-income persons, marginalized households, and minorities. Children, seniors, people with disabilities, working families, and even veterans were already struggling to pay their rent and at risk for losing their housing or becoming homeless. Today, I'd like to just kind of set the context and provide a little background for our discussion. Looking at some of the data from HUD relating to homelessness, HUD data indicates that on a single night in January 2020, over 580,000 people, about 18 of every 10,000 people in the United States, experienced homelessness across the country. This represents 2.2% an increase from 2019. After steady reductions between 2010 and 2016, homelessness has understandably increased in the last 4 consecutive years. And this issue, of course, has been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. African American and Indigenous people, which includes Native Americans and Pacific Islanders, remain considerably overrepresented among the homeless population compared to the broader US population. Almost 4 of every 10 people experiencing homelessness in January 2020 were either African American, 39%, or roughly about 230,000 people. A higher percentage of people in shelters were also African American, 47%, or roughly 167,000 people. Almost a quarter of all people experiencing homelessness, 23%, were of Hispanic or Latino background. With regard to affordable housing, nearly 11 million of the nation's 44 million renter households have extremely low incomes. It's only 7.4 million rental households are affordable to extremely low income renters nationally, assuming households should spend no more than 30% of their incomes on housing. This shortage does not account for people experiencing homelessness, since the Census Bureau's American Community Survey only includes households with an address. HUD estimates that about 568,000 people were experiencing homelessness in 2019. Through the difficulty of identifying the population and the events of 2020 mean that a true count is likely even higher. Taking into account the number of people experiencing homelessness in families, another close to 450,000 homes are needed. The real shortage of rental homes affordable to extremely low-income households, therefore, is closer to about 3.8 million. Even this estimate is conservative, as it does not account for households that are doubled up. With the enactment of the American Rescue Plan, vulnerable people and the nation as a whole still need long-term support for their well-being and economic recovery. President Biden's recent American Jobs and American Families infrastructure proposals included additional funding to address housing, but did not include funding for housing choice vouchers to further prevent homelessness or ensure that people have access to stable and affordable housing. We believe the administration's housing proposals are a good first step, but without enhanced funding for housing choice vouchers, people below the poverty line generally won't be able to access the newly built housing because development subsidies typically do not cover the ongoing costs of operating and managing housing, and the lowest income households will not be able to afford the rent sufficient to cover costs. Ensuring access to housing vouchers would benefit housing developers, help reduce racial disparities in housing, and ensure low-income and marginalized households can access affordable housing. As Congress debates an infrastructure package, the possibility of a reconciliation bill, and the normal appropriations process, Catholic Charities USA will be asking Congress to remember the homeless, remember the importance of programs such as Section 202 to house our seniors, invest $40 billion in the National Housing Trust Fund. We're also going to be asking the administration to further extend the eviction moratorium. We're going to be asking Congress to provide $70 billion to repair public housing. At the heart of this is a justice issue that speaks to the life and dignity of the human person. We know that the pandemic has left so many people who are suffering from behavioral addiction and other issues. We've seen a disproportionate impact on persons of color. And so today we're here to ask Congress to think about ways it can improve programs, fund resources that will help the homeless population. I'd like now to turn it over and introduce Curtis Johnson, our Vice President for Housing Strategies at Catholic Charities USA. Curtis.
Thank you, Anthony. And hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. CCUSA member agencies are active in all areas of the affordable housing continuum, from shelters with social services to all types of housing counseling and emergency housing financial assistance. The CCUSA network also has a long, successful track record of affordable housing real estate development for a myriad of populations, including very low-income families, seniors, veterans, special populations, and even workforce housing. In fact, as you will hear today, CCUSA member agencies typically focus on those with the lowest incomes and the greatest service needs. As of 2020, our network owned and operated over 37,000 affordable housing units, with nearly 4,500 new units in various stages of development and construction. The CCUSA network helped nearly 180,000 people access stable and affordable housing and provided homeless-related services to over 400,000 individuals in 2020. Also that year, we launched our 5-year healthy housing pilot in 5 cities: Detroit, Las Vegas, Portland, St. Louis, and Spokane. Healthy housing combines the housing and case management skills of Catholic Charities with the medical expertise of Catholic Health to solve chronic homelessness. And despite the pandemic, the CCUSA Healthy Housing Initiatives still provided health and social service enriched permanent supportive housing to 176 chronically homeless persons. Recognizing the enormous need for bricks and mortar affordable housing, CCUSA formed a housing community of practice to harness the skills of the network in a coordinated fashion. In short, a key focus of the housing community of practice at CCUSA is to grow the network's new affordable housing real estate portfolio while preserving and rehabilitating current affordable housing properties. We're in this for the long haul. We strive to do this work in an equitable fashion with intentional outreach to ensure equal access to all eligible households. Today, we bring to you 3 highly skilled, qualified panelists from the CCUSA network engaged in affordable housing development and programming in their local communities. They bring evidence of the importance of affordable housing to their communities and to the constituents that you serve with them. More importantly, they will illustrate their specific housing needs and why the infrastructure bill must embrace affordable housing as infrastructure, with dollars for permanent supportive housing for homeless populations, project-based rental assistance so agencies can continue to serve those with the lowest incomes, project gap financing to make affordable housing projects viable, and all types of housing counseling and social services to keep vulnerable populations safe and housed. Now to our panelists. So, since they gave me the mic, I'm going to take a little liberty here, and I'm going to take a lesson from the book of Matthew, since CCUSA is a faith-based institution, and start my introduction with the last panelists and work my way first, and with a few baseball metaphors for clarity. So Our closer will be Mr. James Reynolds. He's a 25-year community economic development and affordable housing professional who is the executive director of the Diocesan Housing Services Corporation in Camden, New Jersey. He oversees operations for 7 senior and family affordable housing properties in South Jersey and is developing several that convert vacant church property sites. James was previously a staff attorney at New Jersey Housing Mortgage Financing Agency and general counsel at a large mid-Atlantic affordable housing development company. He has an undergraduate degree from Stanford University and a JD from Rutgers Law School, and he also serves on the CCUSA Housing Community Practice Steering Committee. Our middle reliever is Ms. Heather Hewitt. Heather is director of the Catholic Housing and Community Services Corporation for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, where she leads efforts to develop senior housing in the region. Her career began as a case manager for homeless women, so she understands very clearly the need for service-enriched affordable housing. Heather was on the housing team that successfully developed 3 of her agency's senior housing develops, and now leads that team who are working on 3 new projects. She has also successfully converted vacant Catholic schools into quality senior housing while engaging parish and neighborhood community support throughout the process. Heather has a BA from Boston College and an MSW from University of Pennsylvania, and she too serves on the CCUSA Housing Community of Practice Steering Committee. And to start things off is our ace, Deacon Tom Roberts. Deacon Tom Roberts has been president and CEO of Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada, also known as Las Vegas, since 2013. He brings over 27 years of private sector executive management and leadership experience, and was ordained as a permanent deacon in 2011. This background with business experience provides Deacon Tom with a unique skill set to address the homeless and affordable housing issues that are in Las Vegas and surrounding counties. In fact, Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada is one of the 5 Healthy Housing Initiative pilot cities that has made great strides. Deacon Roberts has a bachelor's degree in marketing from Youngstown State University and an MBA from Phillips University. He also holds the Certified Property Manager or CPM designation from the Institute of Real Estate Management. So Deacon Tom, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Curtis and Anthony, and good afternoon, everybody. I thought I'd begin by giving you just a very brief overview of the mission of Catholic Charities here in Southern Nevada. As Anthony and Curtis have said, we are member agencies. That is, we choose to participate with our friends in Washington at the national office as an advocacy arm and as a partner. We are also charged independently with our diocese to control and to make decisions based on what the needs are on the ground. So I think the good news about an agency like Catholic Charities, both here in Southern Nevada and my colleagues around the nation, is that we are attuned to what's happening in our backyards. And then our friends in Washington, in this case, Alexandria with CCUSA, provide the infrastructure support so that we can address our mission successfully here at home. So when people come to Las Vegas, they don't normally think about poverty and desperation. What happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas, which is very true for both the tourist population, but those that are locals, as we call them, as I am a local, there are great needs here. And let me just give you a snapshot. Last night, we had 400 men spend the night in our overnight shelter. Now, it's pretty hot right now in the desert, so it's over 100 degrees. Today, we'll serve 1,000 meals to anyone who's hungry, families, children, veterans, anyone who has food insecurity. Our food pantry will help more than 100 families, the working poor, and since the pandemic, new faces that have never been to a food pantry before. And 2,500 seniors will get Meals on Wheels from Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada. So we are on the ground where the rubber hits the road, working with our friends around the community but also nationally, to make sure that we have resources to address these issues. Affordable housing, as we all know, is a critical issue across every community. You may be surprised to know that just recently in March, the National Low Income Housing Coalition put together what's called, as you may have seen, the GAP report. And the GAP report says that of the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the nation, Las Vegas is the leader of crises of severe shortages by only having 16 affordable and available rental units for every 100 people in desperate need. Most people would not think that be the case in a place like Las Vegas. Behind us are communities like Houston and Los Angeles and Phoenix. So there's a real desperate need for affordable housing here. And the one thing that I've learned after 8.5 years here is that people that are chronically and systemically homeless don't get that way overnight. They didn't come into the situation to be homeless. They often stay there because they are struggling with mental illness, anxiety, and then drugs and alcohol become the band-aids. Then they have 3 issues. So the people that we see in our dining room that we feed, people that are in that shelter I talked about, and our housing navigation center, which I'll talk more about in just a moment, are coming in with lots of issues and lots of baggage. And so when we look at affordable housing construction, we believe that part of the solution for that low income, homeless, indigent population is to include mental and behavioral health services in the project. So if we build a 4-story stick construction, 100-unit affordable housing, we want to put clinical space in the first floor in order to help address the reasons why people got homeless and stay homeless. Because if you put someone that's mentally ill or struggling with addictions into a housing project and you don't address the core reason why they got there, you've respectively kicked the can. You really haven't solved or given them a fair chance of sustainability. So the one big ask I have today is when we think about funding mechanisms through the rescue plan, and we know through HUD and LIHTC, we know we need more gap funding, not just to build the units, but to run these units so we can provide these services. That's what we do best. We can provide the wraparound case management to get these people access to resources, but we can't do it unless we have the funds to build that infrastructure. So programs like LIHTC are great, and we're a big fan of those, and we need those, but we need more. The both and is LIHTC and more gap funding through the rescue plan. Another big comment that Anthony made in Curtis is project-based rent vouchers. We are not building these units to be low-income landlords. We are building these units to give people access to housing and get them out of homelessness. So we don't want to be chasing nor spending our limited resources attacking the rental issue. That's what the project-based rent vouchers through our housing authority should be providing. If we can get LIHTC and gap funding to build these things, and we can get the housing authority provide the vouchers, let us provide the rest of the pyramid resources to attack the systemic behavioral and mental health issues that people come to the program with. So the ask again is help us with gap funding for construction, allow us to have resources to provide operational sustainability funding to run these buildings, and project-based rent vouchers are critical if we're going to have sustainability. I'd like to build another one of these units every year for the next 5 years. And if I could build 500 units in the next 5 years, that's a pretty good dent and for one agency and one demography for resources. So I'm asking you humbly, and my good friend Catherine Masto and Jackie Rosen on the Senate side, and Dina Titus and Stephen Horsford and Susie Lee. I know these folks personally. I've spent a lot of time in Las Vegas as a private real estate developer in the gaming space. And then by God having a sense of humor, he asked me to step in and become a deacon and bring my experience to Catholic Charities. So we're very focused on results and efficiencies and dignity and compassion. That's the word diakonia, as deacon, is the Greek word for service. So for me to be a deacon and having a business background, coming to a place like Catholic Charities, I think gives us a unique opportunity to really get to the heart of why people get homeless, stay homeless, and what they need to get out of homeless. And I thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts and my recommendations with you, and I'll pass it back to Curtis.
Thank you, Deacon Tom. Now we'll hear from Heather Hewitt from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Heather?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Curtis. As Curtis had mentioned, my name is Heather Hewitt, and I'm the Director of Catholic Housing and Community Services in Philadelphia. Just a little bit of a background, we're a nonprofit agency that focuses on providing critical services for senior citizens throughout the 5-county Philadelphia region. So our work really focuses on helping seniors to remain independent and lead dignified lives in their communities for as long as possible. We accomplish this goal in a few different ways, through senior community centers, community-based social workers, and in-home support program, but most importantly for our discussion today, through affordable senior housing. So all of the points that I'm going to make are really focused on that senior group, and I think you've heard from Deacon Tom, and you'll hear from Jamie about some of the other populations that CCUSA serves. So currently we operate 5 affordable senior housing buildings in the Philadelphia region. A 6th is under construction and a 7th will begin construction later this summer. So with a total of 361 apartments, these communities are designed for seniors to be able to stay in their neighborhoods, to age safely and with dignity. We're very proud of the work that we do, and I have to admit, I think we do it really well. Our buildings send a message to every resident that they are valued and that they have a right to a beautiful, safe, and affordable home. I've witnessed firsthand how desperate seniors are to access affordable housing. I'll tell you a little story from one of our application days. There was one applicant, he was an individual with a significant mobility impairment. He walked for hours to one of our sites in the pouring rain with a walker, just desperately wanting to gain a spot in that building. He arrived soaked to the bone, just searching for some hope and some well-being. I've personally accompanied a resident to her apartment for the first time. I opened the front door and I witnessed the woman fall to her knees, praying in thanksgiving through tears. There's just nothing like a moment like that. She was so overwhelmed with gratitude to have received an apartment in the building. I've worked with seniors who are escaping abusive living situations, witnessed seniors moving into apartments with nothing more than a few bags, listened as seniors have described living in deplorable conditions with bug and rodent infestations or sleeping on mattresses on the floor. Our ability to succeed in providing housing solutions that transform and save lives has only been possible because we have had tremendous financial support, both on local, state, and federal levels. So I just do want to take a moment and personally thank Senator Toomey and Senator Casey. We're very blessed in Pennsylvania to have 2 senators who really understand the value and importance of affordable housing and who've really been behind our work. However, there is a lot more work to be done, and seniors throughout the country need much more assistance. I'm acutely mindful of the fact that there are older adults across the country that we are not able to give a home to, that our waiting lists are way too long, and they can wait for years that most seniors do not have. So CHCS, Catholic Housing and Community Services, we've developed senior housing through both the HUD Section 202 program and through state low-income housing tax credits. Our latest building, which will start construction later this summer, St. Joseph's Place, is a unique blend of both tax credits and HUD 202 funds, thanks to the HUD 202 allocation from 2020. Our St. Joseph Place development, with an overall development cost of $19 million, was one of only 18 developments across the country that was funded with HUD 202 funds this past year. While we're really grateful for our HUD 202 award, we know that awarding only 18 developments nationally is merely scratching the surface. There's so much need for this funding. We need more housing. Part of the HUD 202 award for St. Joseph Place is a rental subsidy, and Deacon Tom had also spoken about this. While the capital funds that come with HUD 202 are extremely valuable, the rental subsidies connected with the HUD 202 program are what keep the buildings affordable for every senior resident long-term. Knowing that they will pay 30% of their income to rent Residents of HUD 202 apartments have a financial security that's often very elusive to seniors who live on very fixed incomes. So continued and increased HUD 202 funding is critical to the nation's ability to respond to a growing senior population. The senior population in Pennsylvania is expected to grow to 5.4 million by 2030, which is up from 3.3 million in 2010. That's a significant increase. Keep in mind that in 2010, HUD 202s were funded at a level of $450 million. And this past year, we had $51 million of an allocation. The HUD 202 program is a tried and true model of capital investment coupled with a project-based rental assistance that successfully supports seniors on limited incomes to live safely and with dignity. One other point that I want to make is it's often assumed that affordable housing communities are exactly that, affordable. But when you look at the low-income housing tax credit model, that's often not the case. Tax credit models have tiered set-asides, they have set rent levels, and seniors are often significantly rent burdened and have to make difficult choices between prescriptions or paying their rent or utilities. Pairing a low-income housing tax credit model with project-based rental subsidies is an ideal way of creating and sustaining affordability. We've been very lucky. We've had the ability to collaborate with the Philadelphia Housing Authority on 3 of our buildings. Many of our residents are living on a Social Security check and maybe a small pension. Many of them have worked in factories, service industries, the trades, and now they just need a little bit of support to make ends meet. Let's face it, assisted living communities and those extravagant retirement communities are not what most older adults can afford. So we need project-based rental assistance in these buildings to make them sustainable for the long term. And just to illustrate this real briefly, we did a study at one of our buildings, St. John Newman Place. It's one of our tax credit communities that does not have a project-based rental subsidy. St. John Newman Place has 75 households. Of those 75, our study found that 52 of them, or 74%, are rent burdened. Rent burden is defined as paying more than 30% of your income on your housing expense. So here we have an affordable building that is not affordable for 74% of its residents. Without project-based rental subsidies, even affordable housing is a struggle for seniors. So in closing, I just want to thank you for your time this afternoon. This is a critical time in our history, and we can really choose right now to make a concrete difference in so many people's lives. The need is there. We just need to respond to it. So thank you for your time. If you're ever in Philadelphia, I'm happy to show you around and show you our properties. And with that, I turn it over to Jamie, who's right across the river from me in Camden.
Thanks, Heather. So I'm Jamie Reynolds. I'm the executive director, as Curtis mentioned, of the Housing Corporation for the Camden Diocese. And we have a portfolio of about 800 units of housing, 8 separate projects. And most of them are seniors. About 5 of them are HUD 202 projects. We have a couple of tax credit projects, one of which has a full project-based Section 8 allocation on almost all 200 units in that building. And our most recent project, though, I want to talk about just for a second because it sort of underscores what Heather's saying. We were lucky enough to get a 9% tax credit award and build a 68-unit project in a nearby community from our headquarters in Pennsauken, New Jersey, just last year, and opened up actually in the midst of the pandemic, which was an interesting lease-up challenge, but one that our staff really rose to. And it underscores the need that we leased the project up in 4 or 5 months in the midst of a pandemic when people were really fearful. And it was the beginning of the pandemic. We started leasing up in February and we were done by July. So it underscores that notwithstanding, one of the scariest sort of worldwide events to happen in the last 100 years, folks, were still able to get out and get applications in and actually make the move during the pandemic. But the funding for that project underscores what Heather's saying. In New Jersey, an eligible household in a project like this for a low-income housing tax credit can earn more than about $31,000 or $32,000, I think it was last year. And that means that if you don't want to rent burden them, they can't make any less than about $23,000 or $24,000. So you have this very narrow band of folks that you're trying to rent to in the tax credit project. We were fortunate enough at this project to also get the state to allocate us 27 project-based Section 8 vouchers. And as a result of the 68 units, a little more than a third of them were available basically to anyone of any income. And that made the lease up immensely easier, number one. Number two, it met a level of demand that we would not have, in a level of poverty that we never would have been able to reach without having those vouchers in the project. So I think, I think using the loan, you don't want to leave out these folks who are in this $20,000 to $35,000 band from tax credit projects, but you want to make those projects inclusive so that they can afford a wider range of folks who desperately need this kind of housing. So I would just echo Heather and Deacon Tom's sentiments about pairing vouchers with LIHTCs. In addition, some other steps that can be taken to help just improve the overall quantity of available housing. Obviously, increasing the allocation 9% tax credits across the states is an important step that can be taken just to produce more housing altogether. Similarly, fixing permanently the credit ratio at 9% and 4%, and I'm talking somewhat technically, but I think many of you on the call know what I'm talking about. Fixing that permanently helps ensure that the equity that we generate when we do these projects is consistent and reliable over time. In addition, again, providing the project-based rental assistance, extremely important. Also, in many states, these projects, the tax credits alone aren't enough to support the development of the project. And so there's a gap. And having gap financing available through, and states have housing trust funds, there's the Federal Housing Trust Fund. In the case of the federal government, though, home and the Housing Trust Fund really can serve as great sources of gap funding when we get to the point where we're looking for those final dollars to make our projects work. So that's on the bricks and mortar side, and those are really critical initiatives that I think are important to address. The other interesting thing about just the Catholic Charities network that I'll mention as an aside is that, it's no secret that there have been parish consolidations across the country over the course of the last 20, 25 years. And as a result of the parish consolidations, there's an awful lot of land that dioceses and parishes have that is often underutilized. Often those are in very good locations in the communities where they're located, and they're very, very well suited to HUD 202 projects. And so the idea of restoring HUD 202 funding to at least where it was prior to the sequester, when that horrible compromise killed the program for about a decade, is something that I think you'd get full uptake on, a $400 or $500 million a year 202 allocation. And if you did $1 billion, nobody would complain. And I think we'd build a lot of housing for seniors. On the 202 front, talking about the service delivery model, one of the great things about the 202 program is it really does focus on providing enhanced services to seniors. One of the things we found particularly effective in our sites is pairing a wellness nurse with a social service coordinator. And wellness nurses, we tend to hire, we have part-time wellness nurses. And this all started through a HUD initiative, which was a demonstration program called I Wish, which was implemented from 2016 to about 2020, called Integrated Wellness in Supportive Housing. That allowed us to put our first wellness nurse in one of our 202 sites. And we were so pleased with the results of it that we've kind of scraped and borrowed from Peter and Paul and anyone else we could find to actually put wellness nurses at all of our sites now. So we actually have part-time wellness nursing funding at all 7 of our senior sites. 5 of those are 202 and 2 of those are not 202. but we've been able to scrape together those resources. And the additional level of care that we can provide by having wellness nurses, especially when it comes to ensuring medication management's proper among our residents, ensuring that when they transition, when they go out for a medical procedure or hospitalization stay, their transition back into their homes is done seamlessly with the additional supports that they need, whether it be medical devices, whether it be home health aides, visiting nurses. Really great to have a wellness nurse on site to help ensure that that coordination is smooth, because often seniors have adverse health events in the immediate aftermath of a release from either a nursing home or a rehab stay or a hospitalization. So that's a critical area. And I know the Irish program under HUD is being studied, and the final report's not due out till 2022. But I would just say, from our limited experience, in our sites, it is well worth the investment to have a part-time wellness nurse in a senior building. And I think that the ultimate Irish results will show that it reduces the rates of hospitalization, rates of trips to rehab, and reduces the overall burden on the Medicare Medicaid system. Another thing we wanted to talk about today was housing equity. So one of the things that these federal programs don't necessarily do particularly well is address the disparities in home ownership across the country. And in most parts of the country, and certainly in the Northeast where we operate and where we live, there is, housing patterns, mean that we have de facto segregation throughout, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all the states that surround us. And the realistic opportunity for lower income people and minorities in particular to access communities of opportunity and higher income communities just doesn't exist. And I think that while HUD has addressed this issue partially in the sense that they now have an overlay to ensure that new projects, that they're very selective about funding new projects in areas of high minority concentration. One of the things we haven't done nationally at a policy level is taking affirmative steps to ensure not only that are we not furthering discrimination and furthering patterns of housing segregation, but we're actually going out and providing opportunities to allow folks to reverse these trends that really stemmed from housing policies that came from the federal government in the mid 20th century. And so we think it's important that as the federal government and as HUD looks to promote new housing, expand housing opportunities, that it takes that into account and really thinks thoughtfully about how to create opportunities for housing in more affluent communities, for lack of a better term, and in communities of higher opportunity with better public school systems, with better access to transportation and jobs. And again, that's really a missing piece here. And I think that by concentrating on that and focusing on that as a part of the longer term housing strategy at the federal level, we can make serious inroads there. Finally, I wanted to talk about housing counseling. Catholic Charities for the Diocese of Camden, which is our sister agency, has a robust housing counseling program that focuses primarily on crisis housing counseling and counseling to folks to become renters. And this is a critical education piece that is, I think, nationally pretty well underfunded, where folks who are in crisis need to get stabilized, get a handle on their housing budget, get some help getting into a rental situation, and then receive counseling and education on how to manage their budgets and how to ensure that in the long term they can continue to be successful as renters and ultimately, hopefully, convert into becoming homeowners. And our education system in this area is super patchy. And I think that by funding housing counseling agencies and by directing resources, it's a very, very inexpensive way of putting more resources into the hands of individuals so that they can make informed decisions as they move through their lives and as they're, as they go from being single adults to adults with children or families, that they can navigate that successfully and armed with the proper information, not only about just housing opportunities and accessing housing that's appropriate for their budgets, but also really how to manage their overall household finances. It's really housing counseling is a way to kind of help people think more largely or more broadly about their financial lives and how they want to construct a successful financial life for themselves and for their families. Of course, all the things we talked about earlier relating to the availability of affordable housing dovetail in with the housing counseling, because if you counsel somebody and get them prepared to enter into a positive housing situation, but there's a lack of supply, of course, that's a pretty frustrating exercise. And so, housing counseling is a, an important component, but obviously, without the bricks and mortar housing stock available to direct these folks to, that can be frustrating. So I don't want to take away from our advocacy for housing for bricks and mortar, because that's critical. And with that, I'll stop and turn it back to Curtis and Anthony, and I guess we'll take questions and wrap up.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate our panelists for their insights and the work that they're doing to care for people in need, from seniors to the homeless. So excellent work. So thank you very much. I think people don't realize that outside the federal government, the Catholic Charities Network is one of the largest provider of affordable housing in the country, something we're very proud of. It's really at the center of the mission of the church to care for the most vulnerable among us. So I'd like to open it now for some questions. We had a question come in and the panelists can respond at their leisure, asking to discuss your public housing repair needs and provide insight. What could Congress do or should do to help repair existing public housing stock? Please, anyone on the panel?
I can dive in here a little bit. We recently just responded to an RFP for the Atlantic City Housing Authority, where they were seeking to revitalize one very large and one medium-sized affordable housing projects that had been built in the 1920s and 30s, really. Some of the oldest housing stock in New Jersey, some of the first public housing projects. And I think there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to this. For this kind of ancient housing stock, in many cases, de-densification or demolition is really the answer, because the size and infrastructure that would take to renovate these buildings is oftentimes, prohibitively expensive by comparison with raising and rebuilding. The problem with raising and rebuilding, of course, is you have relocation issues, and you don't want to rip apart existing communities. And so it can be a very sensitive issue, and one that has to be played upon. But HUD's done a lot, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years to help give housing authorities the ability to address existing housing through the RAD program. And I think the RAD program has resulted in some really good conversion projects where old projects are able to be revitalized. And also, it's facilitated public-private partnerships that have allowed, in I think a lot of cases, those projects to get in the hands of private management companies that are a little bit more adept at managing modern family housing. And so those are two ways. And again, dilapidated public housing is a tough issue, but again, creating opportunities for refinancing, de-densification, and public-private partnerships, I think, from what I've seen, are the most successful techniques for getting real projects done in a timely fashion. And again, oftentimes, they're done under what's called a mixed finance program of financing, where you have a combination of tax credits, RAD funding or other housing authority funding, and that's worked very well. And these are all successors to the original, Hope 6 program from back in the 90s. And this is sort of the next evolution. But certainly, I would bet that if you looked at the appropriations in those areas, you'd find that the amount of funding compared to the amount of need nationally, there's probably a pretty large gap.
Jamie, does anyone else want to address that from the panel?
This is Deacon Tom. Just quickly.
Go ahead, Deacon Tom.
A market like Southern Nevada, people, because it's not a mature market like New Jersey or Philadelphia, but the fact that there is a public housing here that needs reinvestment, I think your question just raises the issue to say that we all know that we need more affordable housing, new affordable housing, but we also have to reinvest into what we have. So again, Pope Francis is as a Jesuit instructor always talks about the both and in this case, the both and is, I think, having monies dedicated for new construction, which we've talked a lot about today, but to also fund redevelopment that Jamie talked about, and we all know, as he said, every market's different, but there should be opportunities and capital streams available to ensure that the infrastructure that we have is either shored up or renovated. Heather's point about the dignity and compassion component, we operate 3 senior housing complexes here, about 300 units. And our living conditions here with the heat requires that these units have different infrastructure of tile roofs and water lines and all the things that living in the desert means. You have to think about infrastructure a little differently, but we have to invest in that in order to protect it. So I think having buckets for both retrofits, renovations, and new construction are important initiatives.
We have another question that's come in. What would you say is a difference between project-based rental systems and voucher systems? In relation to voucher systems, landlords still have the ability to deny certain vouchers, which could potentially be seen as a result of de facto segregation. How should this issue be addressed? And again, for others, please type in any questions you may have in the chat box. Thank you. Anyone want to take that question?
I mean, I think it's a super question in the sense of, a private landlord has the ability to choose whether or not to accept a voucher or not. So I actually had this in my notes, but I didn't get to it, which is, I think at some level, rebranding the Section 8 program and calling it something else would, to some extent, begin to address this. If among the general population, Section 8 is shorthand for, lousy housing. And so if you're at a party, you meet some people who are not in the industry, you'll hear that term bandied about, pejoratively, quite frequently. And I think that if we decoupled the housing voucher program from the Section 8 program, just from a marketing perspective, and called it something else and figured out an affirmative way to market it. Again, I don't know whether you do it with a social justice spin. I don't know whether and the other thing is that they really need to be flexible to the individual markets. In a lot of cases, the prescribed fair market rent in a voucher might be lower than what the actual market rent is in a particular town where the person's trying to rent. And so if you're a landlord, there's really no incentive for you to take the voucher, because your property, if the FMR is $1,300 a month, and hey, my neighbor's getting $1,500 a month for his apartment around the corner, you're going to try to rent yours at $1,500 a month. So I think if there were more flexibility also in the voucher program, you could use the voucher program as a wedge to get into some of these communities of opportunity that I talked about earlier in my remarks. So those are a couple ideas that that I've had. But again, I think the stigma of Section 8 really is an overhang for a lot of landlords, individual landlords, who would prefer not to rent to somebody who, is in the Section 8 program.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, the reason that I've been advocating for project-based rent vouchers is to address specifically what your comment addresses, that, as a not-for-profit that's trying to get people out of desperate situations, we want the vouchers to go with the project so that people that have needs can get those needs, those with the highest priorities. And so that, I think, helps to eliminate a little of the de facto segregation, in that, in case of a developer like ours and really the network of Catholic Charities, we're trying to get people into housing that have the greatest needs first. And it's sad that we have to prioritize. Our Meals on Wheels program serves 2,500 people. We have 800 on a waiting list, which means our case managers have to make the horrible decision to prioritize, quote unquote, the people that have greater needs, which is a terrible decision to make because we all have to eat. So I think project-based rent vouchers is one answer. As Jamie said, there's a number of answers. That's one answer that I think helps to address your question.
And if I could just comment, I think this goes back to one of Jamie's points from earlier, that one of the reasons that project-based vouchers are so important for us programmatically is because it allows us to rent to folks that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. The tax credit model is pretty narrow. So project-based vouchers in that sense fills a real operational and programmatic need for us, but that's not the answer for everyone that is looking for affordable housing. And so I think there's really a need to have, just as we were talking about before, we need to have both. We need project-based, and folks need housing vouchers that they can take to a private landlord as well. So.
And one of the other things I would just add real quick is we've done something that, and this is not a model that's really out there, but if you look nationally, right, there was just an article in the paper yesterday that some big outfit, I don't know whether it was a private equity outfit, committed $6 billion or something to buying single family homes across the country and is going to rent them privately. One of the things that we did recently was partner with a local social service agency that serves adults with autism and other disabilities, and they have a community-based model. And they're in a neighboring community to our headquarters. That happens to be the town I live in. And what they've done is they've set up a headquarters in the town, and they've encouraged their clients to rent homes or apartments within about a 5 or 6 block radius. These are all adults with cognitive disabilities. They don't drive, but they can live independently with supports at home. One of the things they found, though, is that in this community, the voucher rents that these individuals bring with them are insufficient to rent in this particular market. So what we did was we took some of our surplus funds, we went out and we started buying homes in this community. And so we've bought 3 houses in this community, and then we turn around and we rent them to this population, and we agree to accept the voucher rents. An interesting model might be to sort of replicate that in communities of opportunity, but do it for, folks who are lower income generally, not special needs. And so you could imagine a nonprofit could own a network of 50 or 100, single family homes in a region, buy them over time in communities of opportunity, and simply agree to rent them at the voucher rates. And so long as there was enough subsidy to make those purchases, and again, it's a management headache. Managing a scattered site portfolio of housing is a pain. But that's one interesting way, and that model doesn't exist right now in the country, and could. Similarly, you could do it on the home ownership side, where you supported nonprofits who would buy houses in communities of opportunity and then turn around and sell them at a lower price, an affordable price, to eligible families to help income stratify what are higher income communities. So if if a home in a suburban town costs, I think I saw the other day, the average home price in America is $350,000. If you were able to go into a community with solid schools, good access to transportation and jobs, buy a house for $350,000 or $400,000, turn around and sell it to a family for $200,000, and then maybe slap on a second mortgage that would burn off over time, you'd help that family get into a community of opportunity. You'd actually help them build equity over time because that second mortgage would burn off. And at the end of a 10 or 15 year period, that family's now got an asset. And so there's an asset building aspect to it. So these are some ways that aren't currently in the models that are funded by the federal government, but that really could make an incredible difference, not only from the standpoint of increasing housing supply, but also addressing this issue of de facto segregation.
Thank you, Jamie. I want to be mindful of the time. So we have one final question. And again, if you haven't had your questions answered yet, please, feel free to send them in the chat and we'll get those. But Deacon Tom, you mentioned about waiting. One of the concerns that we have at Catholic Charities USA, and it was probably shared in the network, is really the long-term problem here and the likelihood that people may become increasingly homeless, people who've lost jobs, people who run into some behavioral or mental health concerns during the pandemic. How big is the problem? What are we sensing out there? How large is the need out there? I know this is probably a huge question, but what is the sense out there in the network about the real need? Are we looking at 25%, 50% increased need? What is your sense?
Yeah, I just sent a short note in the chat box because I know we're running out of time. I mean, again, in a market like Las Vegas, we're just 15% I would say would be a generous. We are addressing 15% of the need. So it's a very small percentage. And again, when I think about the narrow band, there's all these bands that Jamie's talked about and Heather. I'm saying just a narrow band of people that are chronically homeless, that if we don't get them into housing with resources, the drain on the system, the cost to push them through a primary medical need through an ER or the jail system or the legal system is astronomical compared to the costs to get them into housing with resources. So as a recovering casino executive, a business guy, I'm always looking at return on invested capital, just like we all are. And I've said Meals on Wheels is a very inexpensive way to keep people in their homes because the alternative is assisted living. The $6 the meal cost is de minimis compared to what it would cost. And as Jamie said, visiting nurses, and we all know what assisted living costs, even not good assisted living. So I think not only are we dealing with a very low volume of need, we are underinvesting in an asset resource that will save money in service provocation through other government programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and certainly these other systems that we all know are overloaded with the need. And the cost of that is not only overly expensive, it's not providing the answer. Putting somebody into a nursing home that they don't need to be there, or putting them into jail, or frankly, putting them into an ER for 72 hours and then releasing them, the cost of that, the $50,000 visit, on the 73rd hour, they're right back in my front door where they started. So it is a layered issue, but there are benefits to the government by investing in these programs that are even over and above the housing infrastructure for investment.
20 seconds.
Can I just give a quick snapshot of the need? I mean, I think it's really hard to capture what the need is because it is so large. So just as a brief example, we opened applications for one of our new buildings, and within 24 hours, we had over 260 applications for 46 units. So just looking at that one 24-hour period, we're only capturing 17%. And if we look at that now, I mean, it's been, weeks, that number of applicants has increased significantly. So it's just a quick snapshot, but there's no way we're anywhere near that 15-20% of need.
And I would just echo that our waiting lists for our 202 properties where there's subsidies, and so you only pay 30% of your income as rent, they're 3 to 4 years long typically.
Well, I just want to say, we've come to our time, but I want to thank all the panelists, Jamie and Heather, Curtis, for your time today, really talking about what is really a pressing issue for our local communities, for our states, and for the federal government. So just thank you all for your time. And please, if you have questions, we can be of assistance at Catholic Charities USA here in DC. We can put you in contact, of course, with any of the charities agencies and the persons here who join us in the panel. So just thank you all for your time, and yes, be well. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much.